It's much appreciated. If you haven't been here before, 5Things is a morning meetup where 3 speakers share 5 key takeaways from one of their favourite non-fiction books. And I hope you'll leave this hour either a bit smarter, inspired to pick up one of the books we talk about today, or maybe just feeling a spot better about stuff, whatever works. A few bits of housekeeping. The event is being recorded, though you won't appear unless you contribute. And if you could please stay muted whilst the speakers are on, that'd be much appreciated. So last time on, there's a red line across the slides. Is that just me? Last time on 5Things, Ross here dug into the psychology of the ordinary civilian involved in the bits of Stephen King's writing masterclass on writing, and Claire ran through around like 500 different names for periods like Shark Week, Outflow, on the Rag, and as well as a ton of other very interesting facts, of course, about periods. Every 5Things is recorded, and they're all on YouTube. I'll just lob that in the chat if you want to catch up. Sorry, just one tick. Yeah, I highly recommend that talk. And yeah, we've had some wonderful speakers along the way, as well as a raft of very interesting books. And as always, I'm delighted to add 3 new speakers. So I'm just admitting folks as well. Driving and speaking at the same time never works out well for me. Yeah, and I'm delighted to add 3 new speakers to this distinguished group. So we will say hey to Emily, Christian, and Saielle. Hi, Emily, Christian, and Saielle.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
So first up we have Emily, and Emily runs a consultancy under the name Tacit, where she's an independent agile delivery and organizational consultant, coach, and trainer. I was fortunate enough to meet Emily at Turing Festival last year, along with all of today's speakers, actually, and where she shared her thoughts on the magic of human connections. Today, Emily is going to stick roughly, I think, to the same topic-ish, and share 5 Things from Social by Matthew D. Lieberman. Emily.
Okay, hello, and thanks for inviting me. As Andy mentioned, we met at Turing Festival in Edinburgh in November, and excuse me, it's too early. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant to go to an in-person conference and actually see real people face to face, and really energizing. Mostly just, yeah, because you get to meet awesome people, you get to hang out. It's not just talking at a screen, is what the last couple of years has felt like. It's much harder to meet people at online conferences, which is really in line with what I'm going to talk about today, which is this book called Social, which is by Matthew Lieberman, and is also based on a lot of research that he's done with Naomi Eisenberg as well. So this book is about the inherent need that all humans have to connect with other people, and how that need for social interaction influences our lives. It's based on peer-reviewed scientific research, excuse me, and backed up with stories and examples. So I love to read stuff that has, is based in something that can be pointed to, that is peer-reviewed and is scientific, but also echoes a lot of the things that I've seen. So it's really influenced the way that I think about the working environment and the work that I do, which is generally a lot about people and connecting people, and particularly the work that I do around communities of practice. So there are a lot of takeaways in this book, and I'm going to go through my 5 I wanted to share with you today. So number 1, there you go. The first thing is that Maslow had it wrong. So you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Sometimes people put a little bit at the bottom that says Wi-Fi. Maslow's hierarchy of needs was introduced in 1943 in a paper called A Theory of Human Motivation. And it's a motivational theory in psychology, which comprises of a 5-tier model of human needs, here represented by 3 tiers. So it's depicted as this hierarchical levels within a pyramid. So in these 5 levels, the levels, what Maslow said is those levels lower down have to be satisfied before individuals can attend to the needs higher up. So he said at the bottom, there are physical needs, which Andy in his red line is underlined here for some reason. Those physical needs are things like physiological needs like food and clothing, safety needs like permanent shelter and job security. In the middle, we have, so those have to be attended to before we can reach social needs, which is friendship, love, belonging needs. And at the top, which is meaning, which is esteem, so things like respect, status, recognition, freedom, and self-actualization, which is the desire to be the most that you can be. So the question is, do we have this wrong? If you can just flip to the next slide, Andy, there you go. Big cross. Yes, we have it wrong. So a bunch of social psychologists say that we do have it wrong. And actually, because of the way that we've developed as humans developed, we have these big brains. We are born whilst we're still maturing. So it takes us a number of years before we can actually look after ourselves, unlike some other mammals that, you know, are born and can get up and start feeding themselves fairly quickly. Because we're born without the ability to meet our own physical needs, those social needs are super fundamental, that we need to connect with other people. We need shelter and belonging. We need other people, usually our parents, to help provide those physical needs. So those social needs are fundamental and at the bottom of that pyramid. And that doesn't go away for our entire lives. It helps us to strive and it helps us to grow. So fundamental is those social needs to connect with other people. The second takeaway that I have is that the FOMO is real. This wonderful sad panda. So Matthew Lieberman, Naomi Eisenberg ran an experiment to understand more about what social pain looks like in our brain. So they put people in an fMRI scan and ran this experiment. So it went like this. So imagine, if you will, you're playing a game in a park with 2 other friends and you're throwing a ball to each other. Imagine it's the summer and remember, and it was warm. It's sunny outside and you're having a great time. You're throwing this ball to each other, trying not to drop it. And then imagine that your friends, you know, for whatever reason, they just stop throwing the ball to you and they keep throwing the ball to each other. You just not throwing it to you anymore, and you don't really know why. You're just watching them having fun, and now you're not in that anymore. So they ran that, they played this scenario to people, and what they found is that the areas of the brain that lit up when people felt, you know, left out, felt this social pain, were the same parts of the brain that light up when people feel physical pain. So what they found out is that what they discovered is that emotional pain, social pain, affects us in the same way that physical pain does. So maybe, you know, we've all probably been through some emotional, some social pain. It's as although we can't see it, it's as relevant as physical pain. So the FOMO is real, and being left out really does hurt us. Conversely, just in some of the research that I've done, working in groups can actually reduce our pain threshold. So there was some research done in Oxford, I think, with a rowing team that showed that when people were rowing together, it decreased or increased their pain threshold. So working in social groups can actually reduce our pain threshold. So my next takeaway is that not being supported can feel like rejection. So this isn't actually a big part of the book, but it was a quote that when I read it, it kind of really struck me. And it's really informed also my work and some of my work on communities of practice and the kind of support that people need when they're working in organizations. So what it talks about is this idea that if you don't feel supported by people, that actually feels like you're being rejected by people. And this can happen in a number of different places. It might happen, you know, in outside work and friendship groups. But it definitely happens inside work as well. And when I read this, it kind of struck me because it felt like I've experienced this before. I've been in places where I don't feel like I'm supported, and I particularly kind of attribute this in some of the conversations I have with organizations about how important good line management or mentorship is, because when you have somebody that you're kind of going to that's supposed to help you and they're just not, and they're not interested, it does feel like you're being rejected. And I have left organizations because I feel like I just don't have support. I once had a line manager that he decided, and he would state this to people, that if he failed people's reviews, or if he told them they weren't performing well enough, that would motivate them to do better. And this was it. He would tell people this, and then tell them they weren't doing good enough. I don't find that a motivator, except for motivating me out of the door. So added to that as well, there was some research done in 2018 called No Employee in Ireland, and talks about workplace loneliness. And this is pre-pandemic, when people were face to face. And that showed that the idea, when people don't have enough support, or they don't have time to form proper relationships, trusted relationships in the workplace, it really affects their job performance. They don't feel safe to speak. They don't contribute as much. So this really does affect us personally, and it also affects our organizations. And you can just imagine that this is increased whilst people are working from home, or whilst we don't get to mingle or meet other people in our workplaces. So my next point is a takeaway from the book, is that our brains are developed for social connections. So this little graph here is encephalization in mammals. Encephalization is a relative brain size measure that's defined as a ratio between how big a brain is to predicted brain mass for an animal. So we have a certain amount of our brain that is given to, making our bodies work. And that extra bit, so we have a lot more extra bit of our brain that is on top of that. So it's, here it gets technical, and I'm going to lose this slightly, so apologies if anyone knows this more in depth than I do. But a lot of this bit of our brain is given over to our social network and understanding how we connect with other people. Cats thinking they're perfect, yes. There's also a relation here towards our default network. When we're not thinking, which most of us are thinking all the time about stuff. When we go into a relaxed state, it's that it lights up the same bit of our brain as our social network. So our kind of default state is social, and the size of our brain, it relates to the size of our social network. There is an evolutionary anthropologist called Dunbar who's studied group sizes in primates and humans, and that size of our brain and the size of our prefrontal cortex as a direct correlation to the size of the social groups that we tend to be in. There's tons of stuff out there that Robin Dunbar's written if you're interested in looking at that. And I am always interested in social group sizing and organizational group sizing. I could talk about that more, but I won't right now. So my last takeaway here is that social connections make our workplace better. So all of this for me kind of really relates to how we connect with other people in the workplace. We need to connect with other people in our lives, and we need this in the workplace as well. It really does affect our experiences, affect our confidence, and affect our motivation. I talked a little bit about workplace loneliness affecting our performance and how much of ourselves we can bring to work. There was also some economist called Grieve, who studied 3 Italian companies and looked at human capital, so things like skill, knowledge and experience, versus social capital, which is the strength of the connections that we have between other people, and found that social capital accounted for a large amount of benefits in productivities. productivity. So the organizations where people are more connected to each other, more kind of socially connected, have more trusted relationships, do much better than organizations where people don't. So which, you know, points to those organizations where everyone is still working from home are not connecting socially in the same way. It has a real impact on organizations. And there's lots of work out there. We can also look at the work of Dr. Anita Williams-Woolley and the Google project Aristotle, amongst others, to see that groups, when people get together and they have these social relationships, they're more intelligent than the sum of the individual's intelligence. So in our groups, we are more effective. We are more effective when we're connected and we're collaborating with other people. And you know as well, in the workplace, it's much easier to do something if you have a trusted relationship with somebody else. So, you know, it's less blind spots, more sense checking. It's particularly important, I said, again, when we're in this what feels like a never ending pandemic. Just quickly to summarize before we move on. So fundamental need is to connect with others. You know, the FOMO is real. Not being supported feels like rejection. We as humans, our brains are developed for social connections, and social connections makes our workplace better. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily. So this is one thing we miss out in remote talks, is actual feedback and applause and noise, but it's being generated. First off, congratulations for saying encephalization at 8:15 in the morning. That is a win for the day, I'd say. But it's really made me think about what we've lost during the pandemic. And yeah, there must be a lot of work and research into that, as I suppose we'll continue to be remote, regardless of whether the pandemic's as serious as it is just now. But thanks so much for that. And yeah, any questions on that topic for Emily, just put them in the chat. That'd be great. But we'll move swiftly on to our second speaker of the day, Christian. And Christian is the founder of PawPrint. You'll no doubt have heard of PawPrint, but if you've not, PawPrint empowers people to fight climate change and does that via a platform that engages employees in climate action. If you run a business who are trying to fight climate change, and who shouldn't be, please check it out at pawprint.eco. I'll just pop a link in the chat in a sec. As well as taking to the stage at Cheering Festival last year. I think Christian was also at COP26. I'm not quite sure what you did there, Christian. Did you talk there as well, or is it a representation for PawPrint?
Yeah, a few different bits and bobs. Didn't make it into the green or the blue zones, but there were different events on, chances to meet with some amazing people. I mean, how lucky we were to have that on our doorstep. So yeah, it was good.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, he seemed to be a busy chap here, there, and everywhere. So I'm really super happy that you found time to share your thoughts on how bad are bananas, the carbon footprint of everything, which I believe is formed maybe the PawPrint Bible. Is that fair to say?
That's right. Yeah, it's very much sort of underpins everything we do. The calculations in it are what underpin the data for people to get their own PawPrint, and then the challenges that we feed to people are based on the data that Mike Berners-Lee and his team at Lancaster Uni, validate that from our team. So yeah.
Nice. Well, Christian, I'll hand over to you. How bad are bananas?
Brilliant. Okay, I found this unbelievably difficult, Andy, to think about which 5 things I should talk about. So they will be quite random. I'll share a little bit about the story, how I found out about how bad are bananas. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had a meeting in Edinburgh, and early days, I went along just to sort of get a sense of what people were doing in the space. And I met 2 young activists and told them about the idea for PawPrint. As you said, PawPrint's all about focusing on what an individual can do about the climate agenda, encouraging, supporting, educating, but celebrating what people can do rather than bemoaning what we can't. And doing that very much based on scientifically valid information. I told these two young activists about the idea for paw print, and they said, goodness, that sounds very similar to How Bad Are Bananas by Mike Berners-Lee. Have you read it? And I said, is that the guy who invented the internet? And which everybody says, but it's his brother. And then read the book, and it very much was the book of the business that we were wanting to build and that we are building actively now. It helps you understand how literally everything you do, every decision you make, has some form of carbon impact. And if you want to look up, the various options within, any category of your life, it does that. Obviously, with paw print, we're taking it a bit of a sort of different spin on it. We're hoping that people within businesses will work together. And funnily enough, Emily, to your point, we'll work in groups because the science makes it very clear, and the experience of our non-exec who built a comparable business in health and well-being proves that people are more likely to make change if it's a social norm. And if I'm in the same group as you, Andy, you, Emily, and you, Saielle, I'd be more likely to do stuff because I don't want to let you guys down, type thing. So How Bad Are Bananas? I'd encourage everyone after this to have a read. But I'm going to walk you through 5 of the things that I think are interesting as tasters to you, hopefully, reading that book and having a play with paw print. So let's crack on, Andy. So I think the first thing is that it is incredibly difficult to get to where we need to get to. The carbon footprints vary tremendously in different parts of the world. I think the biggest ones are in the US and Australia. We're pretty high as a developed, rich country. There's a real correlation between wealth and carbon impacts, and African countries' carbon footprints will be tiny, although in poorer countries, they are, in fast developing countries, they're growing fast, whereas in larger countries, we're starting to come down as we use more renewable energy, not just directly, but also in our supply chains. So the average carbon footprint has come down from, I think, 13.1 to 12.8 tons. Mike postulates in his latest edition that we should be targeting getting down to 5 tons, but that for most of us is very, very hard to achieve. And I'm saying that speaking as someone who's tried giving up a car, going plant-based, stopping flying, doing all the sort of classic big things. It doesn't get you there. So we've got a hell of a long way to go. But in true paw print spirit, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. We shouldn't judge one another about that. We should just start to use paw print, learn about the science, talk about it, socialize it at home and at work, and start taking steps in the right direction. We can't do this all ourselves, not least because we've all got our share of national infrastructure. So first takeaway, we've got a long way to go. Second point is that it is definitely not always obvious. So how bad are bananas? Most people, when you say that to them, most sort of mainstream folk will say, oh God, are bananas bad? There's this immediate feeling of guilt that things have a carbon footprint, and these things that we've taken for granted for years are inherently bad. And the great thing, and this is typical of Mike, is he's such a decent man, and he gets the tone right, understand, like pushing us, but also understanding that we're all human and that life has got to be worth living. Anyway, bananas are actually a fantastic source of calories, and the reason for that is that they grow naturally. They come in their own natural packaging, and although they come from very far away to these shores, they travel by ship on a per unit basis. Shipping's actually not too bad. So bananas are significantly better source of calories than meat and dairy. And I think it's worth talking about tomatoes as well. We've all got our different quirks. I'm naturally a big tomato consumer. And in years gone by, I would have gone into a supermarket, seen British tomatoes and Spanish or Moroccan tomatoes, and immediately reached for the British ones, primarily because I thought that was the environmentally friendly thing to do. Also, a splash of, supporting my local community in there. But the reality is that it depends very much on the season, because even factoring in those shipping costs, those tomatoes that come from Spain and Morocco, particularly in the shoulder seasons or in winter now, because they can be grown with less energy, whereas the ones in British greenhouses, are heated, albeit from an increasingly renewable energy source. The more eco choice there can be either not to have those tomatoes or to have them from other countries. So there are some odd little quirks in the data there that are, maybe sort of trivial, but sort of start getting you thinking about these things. And obviously I've become a little bit geeky about it over the years. So yeah, lots of little anecdotes like that to come across. Next point is, that we've chosen, I'm quite a numbers oriented person, and I think giving people their paw print, which is very much a number, and subdividing that into the different toe prints of home, diet, travel, and other spend, is about helping people to prioritize what really matters. My dad got obsessed with all of this and started to, have not sleep because he was trying to work out how important it was to change from a plastic toothpick to a wooden toothpick. I think, the numbers help us to get perspective and on the number, but it is worth taking them with a pinch of salt. So this is a decent example, because it's purely about the energy used. A battery hen egg will have a lower carbon impact than one that's done, in a more ethically defensible way, free range organic eggs. So these numbers are, I think, really important, but people need to do what they think is right and not take things too literally. That's the key point I wanted to put across there. Yeah, I've referenced this before, but there are certain things, the roads we use, the energy infrastructure that powers the NHS. These are things that it's very difficult for, us to influence directly, that we will just share. And I think the point here is that whether you like it, there are different things that we as individuals can do. I think, we can change our own behavior. We can work with the direct spheres of influence we have. We are focused on helping people agitate for change in an increasingly assertive way, shall we say, in the workplace. But the fact that we've all got this shared national infrastructure means that we very much need to come together and, vote, protest, do whatever we can to, in all these different areas of our lives. I don't want anyone to have the impression that at Paw Print we think it's all up, we're putting it all on the individual to make sacrifices and live a less good life. It's much more about, making the science digestible and helping people understand what they can do, that they have varying degrees of power to make this change in lots of different ways. And then, yeah, the final one, I guess I've done that terrible thing of referencing a few of these early on, but just that all the things that we do will have some form of carbon footprint, and even the little signals that we give off, that will have sort of ripple effects on that as well. So one of the things that we did, we had a Paw Print meal out, can't remember when it was, everything's a bit of a blur, but we'd ordered too much, and one of us pulled out actually requested a takeaway box so that the leftovers could be taken home and not put in the bin. And then I think we did a walk the next day and shared out the food at the top of a hill we went up. And my point really is that one person choosing to make that decision, do something that, you might think it's weird to, or that people would think that you were poor or desperate, or that it was inappropriate to ask for a doggy bag to, take home. But I think these signals are an important part of saying that everything we do and everything we don't do, show the way to other folks. So yeah, Andy, I feel like I've rambled quite a lot there. We've got a summary of the different things that are important, but hopefully that's a taster of both paw print and of how bad are bananas. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Christian. I know it's really tough to fit such a dense book and an important book into 5 key points, but done a wonderful job there. Thanks so much. So round of applause, Christian. Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah, I picked up How Bad Are Bananas, I think, last week, and digging through that, I found like sort of 5-ton lifestyle fairly, or like measuring it in tons fairly nebulous. I don't really know what a ton of carbon looks like, or how I would produce that. But I think I might have got this fact totally wrong. But I think early on the book he says a return flight from the UK to Hong Kong is like 4.5 tons of your CO2 budget. So you've blown like 90% of your budget just in one flight if you're looking to. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, flights are an absolute killer. And I think the real thing, one thing that's quite interesting when we're dealing with our corporate clients is business class and first class, because they take up so much more space, maybe like 3 times that. So we've had some awkward moments where, the big idea was that the top tier in one of our corporate clients were all going to go be, completely transparent on their paw prints. And then they saw the numbers and they were like, we can't do this. But we've had some breakthroughs recently with other CEOs starting to share what they're doing and be sort of vulnerable about it and getting tremendous responses. So some of the numbers are scary. The flying ones really tough for people who
well, sometimes it's essential, but I really like the tone of the book and the tone of how you've expressed yourself today. It's not like shaming people or beating them up. It's just like making people aware of numbers, and it's not quite as obvious as you might think. And I like the spoiler right at the start of the book that actually bananas are okay.
Yeah, bananas are good.
How bad are bananas? Bananas are okay. Could have been a really short book.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thanks so much for that. And pop any questions for Christian in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to explore those. But we'll move last. Finally, final speaker of the day is Saielle. Excuse me. Saielle is Director of User Experience at Kazoo. She also shares some fantastic insights into how to work at work at Blossom at Work, which I think is a really cool site, especially if you're a manager or a wannabe manager. I was truly blown away by one of Saielle's talks last year, so like no pressure, but you set like a really high bar for me anyway, Saielle. But Saielle is going to round off today by sharing our 5 things on Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller. Saielle.
Hey, thanks for having me, everyone. Good morning. I recently read this book and I finished it like January 3rd, and I've been talking to all my friends about it ever since. So I am one of those very intrusive and loud and obnoxious book nerds that when I learn something cool, I want to share it with everybody as soon as possible. So this is a book that's about the neuroscience behind love. And it's got a lot of very practical tips for building stronger, more fulfilling connections across a range of relationships. So the book itself tends to focus on romantic love and romantic relationships, but you can actually take a lot of what's in it and apply it to all sorts of relationships across your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. There's a much broader field of study on attachment theory. And surprise, surprise, so many of the neurological insights about human connection ladder up with what Emily was sharing earlier. So once again, we've kind of like paired in terms of interests on the things that make humans work. And so let's take a look at some of our insights. So first thing is that everyone has an attachment style. And I really appreciated what Emily shared about those connection needs being even before our physical needs. because it's true. So they've done a range of studies on children to find out what children's attachment styles were. So essentially they would have a child play in a room and a parental figure of some sort was watching, and then the figure would get up and leave the room. And there were 3 different main styles that children would kind of go through when that happened. So there were kids who would stop playing and start crying, and that is the anxious attachment style. There were kids who would keep playing, but when they looked at the kid's physiology, that kid was as nervous as the anxious kid, but wasn't engaged in what they call protest behavior, which is essentially your attachment system kind of activating and reaching out for something that you need at that like sociological level. And then there was secure attachment, kids who could keep playing and actually mean it and felt secure enough in their relationship with their parental figure that when the figure left and then came back, they were able to kind of balance that and feel fine. And so everyone has an attachment style, and where this book in particular comes from is specifically the looking at it in adults. So this has been like fairly common in children's psychology. I guess the turning point here was actually looking at, does this carry into adulthood? And if so, how? And so that's kind of how this book was born. Let's take a look at the next point. So this is one of the things that Emily was really talking about that I think is really great, which is that humans are interdependent by design. So essentially, like as a child, you bond with your parents and with other, figures in your life. And there's a ton of really cool studies that are cited in the book, but one of them that was really interesting was that on a physiological level, they've done studies where they put somebody in an MRI, show them like some scary images, and then try to soothe that response by having either their partner's voice or somebody's voice in a different room kind of playing through the MRI, and then physical hand holding while they looked at different like stressors on that person. And people who had a secure attachment style and had their partner there were able to more effectively reduce their physiological stress sooner. And so it is just like a really cool thing to see that humans are social by default, and actually like this is something that's built into the way that we're designed. And so one of the other really interesting things was there's some emerging theory about why humans have these different attachment styles. And one of the big ones is secure attachment is really attached to like community building and doing some of what Emily does at work, which is communities of practice, right? And so community building and being clear and having like a secure attachment style can be part of like bringing people together and articulating needs and setting boundaries. And then the anxious attachment style actually has its own benefits, which are to be hyper aware of danger. When you think about what living on the plains a couple 100,000 years ago meant versus now, like people who were hyper aware of danger could alert everyone else. So, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then avoidance typically tend towards independence. So, people who were more independent could like spread the population and try new living scenarios, et cetera, right? So this is actually like, there's a ton of cool studies in there about how humans are physiologically interdependent, like regardless of anything else. And I think one of the cool things that this touched on was like, we have this like mythos of codependency, and like there is a truth to it, but there's also a lot of like myth to how we think about codependency in society. And it's not a bad thing. One of the things that I took away was dependency is not a bad word, right? And so that's really, really fascinating to think about, like, actually your body just does this. So how do you do that in a healthy way? And that's really what this book is about. And it was really cool. Let's take a look at our next insight. Okay, so this was one of the big things that I think is fascinating. So essentially, the anxious attachment style is probably one that we recognize. There's the meme of like the crazy ex-girlfriend, right, with the big eyes and like, you know, why are you ignoring me? I texted you 3 seconds ago. Do you not love me anymore? That sort of thing, right? So that's like the stereotypical anxious attachment style. But they go through this anecdote, and you know, these are pulled from real studies and interviews that they've done. And if you work in tech at all and you like user research or anthropology, like this is definitely a great book for that, because these are real case studies. And it's okay, you can keep typing in the chat. I don't care. I'm not the police. So the spark that some of us tend to feel, like when a relationship feels quote unquote boring, could actually be your attachment system activating, because you have an anxious attachment style and you gravitate towards people who have an avoidant attachment style. And this actually happens a lot. So, you know, they tell the story of one person who had a string of like really terrible relationships, but then got really bored with like a very secure relationship because it was missing that quote unquote spark. And so one of the big takeaways for me was like, oh, some people can actually like mistake like their anxiety for like passion, because they spend a lot of time thinking about the relationship and worrying about it and investing in it and like trying to make it work and trying to get it right. But actually like that quote unquote spark, or that like mulling and kind of ruminating, can actually be a sign that like you're not dealing with your own internalized anxiety really well. They have, again, for those who like love consulting or work in tech, like they have a good 2x2 of how this works. And so there's avoidance, high or low, and then there's anxiety, high or low. And so high avoidance, you know, like, do you avoid intimacy with others? So if you think about intimacy, and then are you like very intimacy open or intimacy avoidant? And then anxiety, are you like focused on the behaviors of others and the relationship? Do you spend a lot of time like worrying about the relationship? Or you just kind of like work through things as they come? And so if you're low anxiety, low avoidance, you have what they call a secure attachment style. And if like the further along you move, the more you have other styles. Let's take a look at our next insight. So I totally blew through this a little bit, but the really interesting thing about the avoidant one is these people tend to say that they are fine and independent and whatever, but like actually they all need the same level of connection. It's just that when that intimacy starts to creep up, it causes anxiety in them. And so they try to find ways to push people away. So for example, I was out with a friend the other night and we were on a walk, because keep your social distance, kids, wear a mask, get vaccinated. So we were out on a walk and she was telling me how ready she is for a relationship. And one of the really interesting things about that was how she's not necessarily prioritizing people who are emotionally available for the things that she needs. And so as we were talking about this, I was like, hey, you should read this book, Attached. I'm actually giving a talk on it later this week, but it's really interesting because I think despite you saying that you really want like a loving emotional relationship, like look at the people that you're choosing to try to be with, they're not emotionally available to you. And so you're kind of designing yourself for failure kind of from the beginning, right? And so how do we at least like bring some awareness to this and talk about the ways in which maybe you need to have a healthier relationship with your own self and with like what you think you want and what that might look like for you. And then the other big thing, last thing, is I think this is one of the things that this book is just a little bit older. So it's interesting how attachment theory has evolved since this book was written, because it takes a very static approach, and it you know, it can be very like Myers-Briggs or anything else, right? All models are broken, some models are useful. So don't get overly attached to your attachment style. it is fluid. It is something that can change and can depend on your behavior. So if you think about, like, you might be really secure at work, but really anxious in your personal life, right? Or it could just depend on the other people that you interact with. And so one of the things that I think is really important is, like, as you think about this book, try not to think about this as like a static category that can't change. This is actually one of the really awesome things in the book, is they talk about very practical interventions. So if you have an anxious attachment style and you kind of approach like loving relationships and dating or anything else with a scarcity mindset, and you're like, I have to find that one person, and the only way that I'm going to make this work is to find that one person, and like you overinvest in like finding that one person. One of the stories in the book is actually about a person who they suggested just start dating more as a way to build confidence. And that person did, and it worked really well for them because they were able to, over time, like learn an abundance mindset by going, oh, there are lots of people that find me attractive. There are lots of people that are interested in who I am as a person. And so that built that confidence that was able to then have other impacts in their life and helped them find ways to like mitigate some of the most toxic insecurities that they were carrying around for themselves. So it's a tool. All models are broken, some models are useful. The neuroscience is really fascinating. Whether we actually know everything that there is to know is kind of like TBD, but don't just read this book and kind of sit on it. Like, read this book and like expose yourself to some other things in the broader field, because it's really, really fascinating, super cool. And like, yeah, everyone has attachment styles. Go find yours.
That was awesome, Saielle. Thanks so much. That was fascinating, something I know very little about. I'm really glad you mentioned the sort of fluidity of it as well. I think it's one of the issues I have with stuff like Myers-Briggs is that it sort of maybe limits people. You know, you hold that profile forever and ever, and that's not truth. You know, it is fluid, so that's super interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, as normal, I've got a billion questions, but I'm just going to whiz back to one you asked of Emily, actually. It's probably one for all three of you. I think it's a really important issue we all face just now, assuming like sort of remote working will continue, you know, for the foreseeable future. But Saielle asked you, Emily, can you tell us about, you know, what quality social connections look like?
Yeah, and I think it's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, sorry, it's a tough one.
We can feel what, in some ways, we can feel what good looks like. I guess it depends on our attachment styles, or our current attachment styles. But when I think what I'm always trying to encourage people to do in the workplace, particularly as we're so distributed and far away from everyone, is to find ways to connect with people that is agendaless. So often we'll go into a meeting and there's a point to the meeting, we've got an agenda and there's a thing that we've got to do, and we come out of it with whatever, and it's very kind of focused in on, we're looking towards some outcomes or some outputs. And actually really it's about so like I really love doing things like in my meetup community that I run, we have random coffee where people just get half an hour to connect with somebody and just chat about whatever is on their mind. It doesn't really matter. They kind of have meandering conversations, which could be about work, could be about not work, could be about anything. And it's trying to find those kind of replacing those moments that would lead to serendipity, like bumping into someone in the hallway and that kind of thing. So finding those moments, I think, are really important.
I wanted to ask Emily a sort of clarifying question on that, if that's okay, Andy.
Of course.
Like different personality types sort of put themselves forward for those sorts of things differently. And I was wondering if you've got any advice or examples of ways of, you know, bringing people together, particularly in this remote environment, who tend not to do that, the more introverted types.
Yeah, it's really tough. Although I consider myself an introvert, as with a lot of kind of social anxiety as well, but I force myself to do do things, which makes me, I don't know what kind of personality type, but I find like not always doing kind of one-to-many or many-to-many, doing situations where you kind of have one-to-one. On the Random Coffee channel that I have on my Slack group, I do have kind of create this thing where people share selfies. It's usually a cheesy Zoom photo, and just mention what they talked about to try and create some of that FOMO. So it's like, oh, that looks like people had a really fun conversation, and try and kind of encourage people by going, this is what value you get out of it. But I think if you're in a workplace, you're in a team, it's also trying to be aware of those people that do withdraw, because it's really hard when we're remote and we're online, because the people that will withdraw from interactions, it's really hard to find them. You can't just walk over to their desk and say, are you doing okay, and put yourself in their kind of peripheral vision. You actually have to kind of purposely reach out to people and ask them how they're doing. So I think there is an aspect of us, if that's hard because we're all suffering, but trying to be aware of other people that we might normally interact with more, and trying kind of finding ways to pull them in. There's also other ways to connect. Like I have a channel on my Slack group called Daily Outside Photo, where I'm trying to force myself to go outside, take a photo and share it with people. So little ways of people connecting through something completely different, which is like, here's a photo of my neighborhood, here's the sky today, and it's just different things.
Yes, thanks.
Saielle, Danny just asked if Attached talks whether there's a link between sort of attachment styles and extroversion or introversion.
So the book touches on this, and they kind of started by looking at different layers with which to understand people's personalities. And what they found is that your attachment style is actually more fundamental and more consistent throughout your life than some of these other sort of like behavioral lenses, if you will. So you can be either deeply introverted or deeply extroverted and still have the same sort of like attachment style, right? So think about, we'll pick two very stereotypical sort of things just for the sake of ease of use, not that these are universal, right? But like extroverted finance bro could have a boyfriend who makes him anxious, and that is based on finance bro's own insecurities, and he's still extroverted, has a great time with his friends, has a social life, but spends a lot of time like dwelling on his relationship with his partner and what his partner is doing, and like how to maintain that relationship, build on it, sustain it, and just spends a lot of energy. So that anxiety is really about the relationship itself. It's not like an internalized personal anxiety so much as it is like anxiety about the relationship, right? The avoidant will go, oh no, there's too much intimacy here, I need boundaries, right? I need my space. And then the secure attachment style is really about, and I think it's really beautifully done. They, in the book, talk about this, very introverted person who has a secure attachment style and turns out to be like the ideal partner for one of the other folks in the book. And so it's really interesting how they kind of unpack that and go, look, you don't have to be like a massive extrovert to be secure, and you don't have to be super introverted either. It just kind of depends.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Saielle. Actually, I'm not sure if this is the right question, but noticing like a sort of tension, maybe it's a question for everyone here today, between maintaining human connections, understanding each other, but also trying to minimize like our carbon footprint as much as possible. Obviously, there's like quite a big trade-off. I think in-person meetings are really important, but we probably don't want to fly to Hong Kong to make that happen, maybe. But Christian, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or insights into how you might manage that sort of tension.
Yeah.
How Paul manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of trend, and I know a lot of councils are looking at this, is to try and develop a 15-minute or a 20-minute sort of city or settlement whereby a lot of your needs, physical, emotional, and so on, can be met within that area. I think one of the really nice things during the lockdown is certainly in our area, is how we've got to know our neighbours better, and naturally started helping one another out a lot better, and that is absolutely in line with lower carbon living, and people being able to, I think there'll be this trend towards maybe not commuting into a big city to work, but walking or cycling to a co-working space from time to time. Lots of things like that, I think, will evolve as we all, understand how much these things have an impact, but also that, the mental health sort of tsunami that is facing us, that shouldn't be underestimated. I've seen countless examples, one or two steps away from me, of really serious mental health issues, and so whether it's for reasons of physical health or addressing climate change, that need for connection that Emily's articulated so well, and maybe knowing yourself in the way that Saielle's articulated, like, just so fundamental, so critical before you can do other things that are of a longer term nature. Yeah. So yeah,
it's a hierarchy of needs forming there, an alternative one. Oh, I'm afraid, thanks for that, Christian. Sorry, I'm afraid we have to draw a close to today. I really enjoyed that today, and thanks so much to our three speakers. That was just fascinating. It's normal, my head's buzzing with ideas. So thank you so much again. That was just so awesome. I'll bung in a link in. We'll be doing this again in February. Yeah, please come again if you enjoyed today. But yeah, final thanks to speakers, everyone who joined this morning as well. Hope you found that interesting and take these insights into the rest of your day. But yeah, thanks folks, and hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Brilliant. Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.